Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. I'm Silas Archer, and this is what the hills taught us after 345 days. It's 2:17 a.m. The wind slides off the saddle and carries cold into the tower. I sit on the watch chair we bolted to the platform, and I keep my light off. The map board rests under my hand, chalk lines for routes and fallback marks, and I listen for the creek and for anything that isn't the creek. I keep my voice low. Inez said the west path was empty, so I marked the time and held the gate key. Theo sits by the radio with the headset unplugged, and I asked him to log wind speed and nothing else, and he tapped the page twice and stayed quiet. Jun checks the strings across the goat track, and I told him to leave the last bell loose so we can hear the difference. Rory runs the ridge before dawn and counts cars in the valley, and I reminded him to stop on the second cairn and watch the switchbacks. The Stronghold looks dead from the road. That is the point. We packed dirt into windows and left broken tin in the fence so the place hums like junk when the wind hits it. The tower is a radio pole with a ladder and a wooden seat. Nothing worth a fight unless you know the cables under the rock. Water lives in a buried tank above the garden. We feed it with rain and a small line from the creek when the flow is kind, and we pasteurize with a thermometer to save fuel. The numbers matter. The count is the plan. Something talks in the canyon when the wind crosses right. It is never the same voice. Tonight it sounds like a boy who knows my name, and I kept the safety line around my waist because the worst thing here is not the fall. It is the sound that makes you step. We do not chase echoes. The Stronghold sits on a shoulder below the ridge where a ranger shed once stood. We built around its bones because the posts were straight and the roof kept rain out. We left the outside ugly on purpose. Pretty draws eyes, ugly gets skipped. 3 terraces cut the slope. The top grows potatoes, hardy greens, and beans that climb wire. The middle holds a work table, a barrel rack, and a line where we dry cloth and hang rope, and we sweep it before dusk to read footprints at dawn. The lowest keeps the creek gate and 2 sled rails for moving loads without noise. Water lives in a buried tank above the garden, and we hide the lid with brush. Rain runs from the roof into a settling barrel and then into the tank. A thin hose from the creek feeds it when flow is steady. We strain through cloth and gravel and then through a carbon tube, and we heat a pot until the thermometer crosses safe. I watched the steam. Inez said, "Give it 1 more minute," and I asked her to mark the lid when done. Power is small. A short mast holds a hand-built wheel that turns when the saddle wind shows up, and a small panel leans toward the sun. We count charge like food. Lights stay low, radios sleep unless needed, and heat is a coat or a blanket. Theo keeps a paper log by the battery box. I told him to draw an arrow when the wind shifts and note the time. Alarms are strings, bells, and things that click when weight finds them. We run line across the goat track at ankle height and hang cans with a handful of grit so they whisper before they ring. Thin slats by the gate tick under a foot. I walk the line. Jun said the 3rd bell was too tight, so I asked him to leave a finger of slack and push the knot lower. Our doors are simple. The main door is a plank that drops into a slot in the floor, and the second is a hatch through the shed. We keep one rule: never open both at once. I tapped the hinge. Rory said dry metal will sing, and I told him to oil the pivot and mark the day on the board. We sleep in the core, the old storeroom beneath the roof. The walls stay bare so we can hear the world through them. Bedrolls live in rows, bags at the foot, shoes tied to loops so they do not wander. We do not scatter our lives. When the pipe rings 3, we know where to reach. The radio sits on a crate with a note taped to the lid. The note is short because panic steals steps and notes give them back. Do not transmit unless we are burning or bleeding. Write first, send second. Log the time, the word, and who was on. Theo watches the set like a stove. I set my hand on the crate. He said the background was clean, and I told him to keep it that way. We set our day by a board and a bell. The board shows 4 bands for the half day. Watch, garden, wood and water, fix and check. The bell is a piece of pipe that rings once for swap, twice for call, 3 for all. We ring soft and not at night. The night has rules. No light on the ridge, no metal on metal, no talk near the gate. I pointed at the list. Marin said he knew it, so I asked him to say it out loud. We keep lines straight, corners clear, and paths that bend slow so a body can fight and still breathe. We sweep each evening and pick grit out of the floor so our feet do not slip during trouble. We mark bad stone with chalk and tie cloth to low metal so heads do not bleed. We do not leave hazard to memory. We count our fears and write them where we can see them: fire, thirst, infection, people. We drill each with small tasks that take minutes. We pass a burning rag to see how fast flame moves. We carry water from the creek with the sled and do not spill. We check the ridge morning and evening for dust or glass. The last part is the fake. We leave a path that leads nowhere and a door that sticks on purpose. We stack junk by the old fence so it looks like a trap and is one, but only for stubborn feet. I checked the junk. Theo said the sign still reads condemned, so I asked him to leave the dirt on it so it looks honest. This is the Stronghold. It does not look like much, but it holds because we keep it small, we keep it plain, and we do not lie to ourselves about what it can do for now. We did not plan the hills, we ran out of flat ground. On day 290, we counted food, water, and fuel, and the line ended in 3 weeks. I kept the map open. Inez said high ground buys time, and I asked her to mark switchbacks we could reach by dark. Theo cut power to save charge. Jun boxed rope and nails. Rory ran a loop to see who watched. Marin searched the sky for a sign. We left at first light. The truck coughed and then held. We tied gear so it would not rattle. I checked the street. Rory said the east corner was empty, so I told him take the lead and count windows. Inez tapped the dash for each turn. Jun held a pry bar. 2 blocks were quiet. Then a bottle rocket popped overhead. A laugh drifted from a porch, and a second rocket hissed out in a puddle. I killed the lights and let the truck roll. Inez said keep left at the burned bus, so I counted to 3 and eased the wheel. A man watched us. I did not meet his eyes. The road to the ridge began as cracked blacktop, turned to broken concrete, then to dirt. The engine grew hot. We used hand signs because the hill carries sound. Theo tapped 2 fingers for heat. I kept the climb slow. Jun pressed his palm to the glove box. Inez looked past her list. Halfway up, a loader bucket lay sideways across the cut filled with stone. The gap left was bike wide. We stood with hands on hips and air we did not want to let go. I kicked the shoulder and watched dirt roll to bare rock. Rory said strip the bed and float the left wheel, so I told him stage heavy pieces by the switchback. We passed jugs, bolts, the small panel rope, and food. The shoulder took us if we asked quiet. I set the left wheels near the drop and kept the right slow on dirt. The rear slid a hand's width, then bit. Inez said keep it straight, and I kept it straight, and the bucket passed under the mirror by an inch. Marin laughed once and swallowed it. A nail took the right front 2 bends later. We heard the sigh and felt the pull. No spare was worth the time. I said hide the truck at the next bend and walk the rest. Inez said take what carries and leave what shines, and I asked them to move before the rim showed. We rolled the truck into brush, broke branches, and dragged them back over the hood. The last part was on foot. Packs cut shoulders, the air thinned and bit. We spaced out so one stumble would not take all of us down. Rory stacked stones at turns. Jun tied a short rope to the tool crate. I carried the map but did not need it. The ridge pulled like a compass in bone. The shed waited where the slope eased. The door hung wrong. Windows were patched with wood and yellow plastic. A sign warned about fire in a dead season. Inside, dusty shelves, a table carved with names, and a steel square in the floor with a ring. Inez brushed the ring and lifted slow. The hinge croaked. Cold air rose from the room below. I climbed down because the first body in should carry the map. The floor held pallet scars. Thick walls took the edge off sound. I set my light on the table. Inez said the air was good, so I asked her to pass the bags. Theo lowered the radio. Jun passed the pry bar and hammer. Rory kept the door. We built the core by subtraction. We marked a square with chalk so a foot could find the path in the dark. Bedrolls along one wall, food along the other, water in the far corner. The radio sat on the table with a paper log. I wrote the date, the day number, and one word to keep us honest: hold. Night taught fast. Wind found nails and made a tone that lived in your teeth. The ladder shifted at night. The door clapped if the latch was not wedged. I kept my voice low. Theo said the battery barely moved, and I told him the dark saves more than power. Inez counted heartbeats. John slept in his boots. Rory kept the threshold. At dawn, we checked the creek gate and saw prints we did not make. Bare feet, long toes, thin pads, a drag on the left like the ankle would not bend. They came from under the bridge and went back the same way. I raised a hand. Inez said mark it and do not follow, and I asked her to hang a bell that whispers before it rings. The next day we walked our retreat in case the only safe move was down. We counted steps and timed the run to the second bend. Theo watched the valley for dust and wrote the first flash of glass with the time. Jun tied a guideline from the door to the first tree for fog. Rory cut grips into a plank for the hatch. We owned none of this. We borrowed sky, slope, and creek and paid in care. Care is sweeping so the floor does not tell on you. Care is closing a door without a sound. Care is logging the truth even when the truth is we are not ready. We read those words before sleep. On the fifth night, the canyon learned my name. It was a soft call, not a scream. The wind carried it uphill. I set the chalk down. Inez said the ridge path held, and I told her keep the hatch because the voice in the canyon said my name. We called them hollowers because the sound comes out wrong, like a throat copying humans and only getting pieces. We named them so orders could stay short. When they reached the ridge, fog hugged the terraces and the bells on the goat track breathed before they rang. I kept my light off and the radio. Inez stood by the hatch with the bar ready. Theo held the log. Jun watched the string. Rory covered the slope. Marin tried to slow his breath. The voice came as a split version of my name, pushed through a pipe, then tried a second name we did not own. I kept my voice low. Inez said west was empty, so I asked her to drop the bar on my count. Theo wrote the time and voice, and I told him to add wind east to west. Jun touched the string and felt a hum he did not like. We set 3 rules and wrote them big. Do not call back, do not chase sound, do not open for pity. A shape reached the bottom rail and stopped. It listened. It made 2 breaths like someone learning a word. Then a small sob that did not belong to a person. Marin flinched. I set a hand on his sleeve. He stilled. The shape tipped its head and waited. I kept the light off. Rory said he could draw and hold, so I asked him to aim for dirt if it climbed. A second voice came from the creek bed, a woman's tone with 2 words: help and please. It would have been easy to answer. I kept my voice low. Theo said the valley was quiet, so I told him to kill, transmit, and keep the pencil moving. We did not share our air. Fog thickened. The shape drifted along the rail and pressed a hand to the wire, not like a test, more like it wanted the hum. It leaned and made a laugh that had lost its chest. The bow creaked. Rory steadied. Jun raised the spear. Inez counted, and on 20 the bar dropped into the floor slot. The fog turned the sound to wool. The shape lifted its head and waited for us to speak. We did not. We held for an hour. The voice tried names, most wrong, one close enough to cut. It copied a dog bark, then an engine cough, then the word open in a way that almost worked. What saved us was boring it. We refused each trick. The shape went back to the creek. We did not celebrate. We wrote what we heard. We added a 4th rule. If a step takes you, give the step to someone else because the hill has places you do not come back from alone. At dawn, we checked the rail and found a smear of skin on a barb the color of wet ash. I kept my voice low. Inez said do not touch it, so I asked her to burn the rag we used to lift it. Jun poured ash along the posts to catch fresh prints. Theo drew the creek bends so notes would match ground. Later that week, a voice used a can at the bottom of the slope. It said water and cold and clicked like a dry mouth. We followed our rules. We did not throw a line. We did not answer. We watched how long it could try on one battery. Nights changed. We moved the radio lower. We stuffed cloth where wind sings. We slowed steps by the goat track so the bells would not learn us. We changed where we stood to listen. I checked the count. Theo said spare one arrow if the rail failed, and I told him none until a hand crossed the second wire. Rory watched dirt instead of notches. Jun set a spring under a plank so it would slap a heel without a bang. Inez set water to heat and said wait for the line, and I asked her to mark the lid. They did not rush our hill. They listened and tried to make us open with our hearts. The hill does not love you back. We learned that and lived. That night I wrote one line and said it so the room could hear. We hear a voice, we do not answer, and we hold until the string goes dead. We thought the valley was empty, it just learned to move quieter than us. 2 days after the hollowers tested the rail, Rory came back from the North Spur with a look I did not like. He set down his pack and I kept my voice low. He said tire prints crossed the dry wash and I asked him to draw the line from the quarry to the motel lot. The tread was wide and rough, not farm, not family. Someone dragged weight uphill and did not care about noise. We walked the ridge as a thin line. Theo stayed in the tower. Jun checked the strings. Inez kept the core ready. Marin carried the slate. At the overlook we saw the quarry road like a pale scar. Fresh dust lay where wind had not pressed it flat. A truck cut through before dawn and parked short of the motel. 3 figures moved the lot with rifles low, and I told Rory to count the doors they tried. Inez watched the windows and frowned. Glass was punched from inside. 2 rooms were smoke black. A third hung a sheet like a flag. We slid back under the crest. I kept my voice low. Theo said the road by the silos carried sound, so I asked him to keep the radio cold and log echoes that did not belong to the hills. At dusk, a thin buzz came from the saddle, steady. Theo lifted a finger and pointed past my shoulder. I kept my voice low. He said a drone crossed the ridge east to west, and I told him to shut the set and cover the board. It was the size of 2 hands and rode the air calm. A red blink sat under its nose, and a square eye panned the slope. It passed once, drifted back, and slowed. Inez stood in the hatch with cloth over the lantern. Jun lay flat under the ladder. Rory took the bow and held behind the mast. We did not shoot at a camera. A shot is a flare that never dies. We made the Stronghold look tired and empty. No faces in windows, no clean lines. I kept my voice low. Theo said the blink slowed near the creek lid, so I asked him to breathe and count the beats. The drone paused over the rock pile that hides the tank cap. The red blink held 3 counts. It tilted and showed its side. A signal traced along the ridge and then down to the quarry. We moved on practice and let the place play dead. Inez lifted the cloth twice to make a faint mess of light. Jun brushed dust from sled ruts. Rory set a cracked tin on the fence so wind would sing broken. Marin pressed his palm to the floor to feel any step not ours. The drone circled and then flew low toward the saddle road. It hovered where the goat path meets a trail we do not use when wind is wrong. I kept my voice low. Theo said the blink turned fast, so I asked him to draw the line it flew and mark where it slowed. We met under the tower. Trucks mean fuel and food, but also hands that take. A drone means eyes we cannot tire. They will see the creek lid and the garden rose. They will test us with sound like the hollowers. We set a plan. No fire, no metal, no light on the ridge. We shifted water after dark with sleds under blankets so shapes looked like brush. We scattered old cans so the ground told the wrong story. We cut any straight line that read as a path. I checked the tool list. Jun said pry bars were back and wedges tied, so I asked him to mark the 2 stones that will move first if we need the slide. Theo took the mast apart so the tower looked like a dead stick. Inez relabeled crates. Rory walked the contour. Marin scrubbed clean spots with dirt and charcoal. We let the day pass. The drone came at noon and near dusk. It never crossed the core. It hovered near the creek lid. I kept my voice low. Theo said the blink sped up over metal, so I asked him to note it and ignore the urge to hide what we cannot bury tonight. After sunset, the valley moved. Lights blinked near the quarry, a truck idled. Voices rose and fell. We counted 9 men. They did not come that night. We slept in bands and kept packs where hands could find them. In the morning, a line of dust climbed the far switchbacks and stopped at the first cut. 2 men went up and looked for signs. They did not look long. I kept my voice low. Inez said wait and let them get bored, and I told her we would move only if they moved. They left before noon. The drone did not. I checked the map and tapped the tank lid mark with my thumb. The drone drifted back toward the creek, and I kept my voice low. Theo said it circled twice, so I asked him to kill transmit, and we watched it tilt toward our cistern. We pick fights we can finish. Thirst is not one of them. Today, the morning after the drone flew low, I walked the terraces and the tank lid looked wrong. Brush lay where we left it, but the rock sat off and dust at the rim was smeared. I kept my voice low. Inez said the creek was clean and slow, so I asked her to stand off while I checked the seal. The gasket showed a thin line like a finger had lifted and set it back. The padlock was shut but not clicked. That is not a mistake we make twice. I checked for prints. A heel pressed and then someone brushed it with a branch to blur the edge. I kept my voice low. Theo said he signed the log at dusk, so I asked him to read names aloud. He said his, he said Inez, he said June, and he stopped before Marine. Marin stared at the dirt. I kept my voice low. He said he dragged brush to help the cover, and I told him we do not dress the lid in the morning. He said he did it before light. I asked why. He said the drone. We do not make a court, we make a list and follow it. First is safety. Water is safe or it is not. Inez boiled a liter while I pulled a sample for a jar. Theo marked the batch and wrote the hour. Jun closed the creek feed. We tasted for metal, looked for sheen, and held the jar to the sun. It told us nothing sure. I kept my voice low. Inez said switch to stored water, and I asked her to lock the jugs and count the caps. Theo set the board to strict, no wash, no soak. Sip and stop. Suspicion adds weight. Jun checked strings twice. Rory walked the switchbacks. Theo wrote more than he spoke. Inez kept the core neat. Marin asked for the hardest jobs. We held a talk by the table. No anger, just steps. I kept my voice low. Theo said the lock was shut at 1940, and I asked him to show his mark. He tapped the page. Inez said she lifted the lid at 700 to check level, and I told her to show her handprint on the dust. It was there. Jun said brush moved at dawn, and I asked if he saw a hand on the lock. He did not. Rory said he watched the goat track and the creek bend, and I asked him to draw his line of sight. I looked at Marin and waited. He said he checked the cover, and I asked him to show where he stood. He walked to a patch with old scuff. He said he wore soft boots. We added a rule, 2 on the lid, never 1. The key lives at the tower tied to the chair. I kept my voice low. Theo said copy, and I told him to draw a circle on the board so no one forgets where the key sleeps. We could not draw from the tank until we knew, and the creek ran thin. Jun dragged the sled to a shaded bend and filled 2 jugs where the water moved, and I asked him to count to 60 before he dipped so mud could clear. Rory watched. Inez kept the flame small. The jar sat like a question. Midday heat makes people say too much or not enough. I kept my voice low. Marin said he meant to help, and I reminded him to ask before he changes a cover. He nodded and went back to work. Later, Theo heard a burst on a dead channel. 3 seconds of static, then silence. I kept my voice low. He said it came from the quarry side, so I asked him to write the time and do nothing else. At dusk, Inez taped the lid. We are a room with a pot and a log. A strip with a mark will tell us if hands come back. Near midnight, I stood by the lid. I listened for a step and for the wire. Nothing moved. I touched the lock and felt cold. At dawn, we chose. We bled the first 10 liters to the ground. We took the next 10 and boiled long. The pot rattled. I kept my voice low. Inez said, "Call it safe enough to live," and I asked her to mark the tape again. If it moves, it speaks. We held water tight. We poured with 2 hands and said numbers aloud so the pour did not drift. We did not drink on the path. We did not wash a cup without a reason. By noon, the taste of fear was old. I checked the strings. Jun said the 3rd bell still dragged, and I told him to leave it. Theo lowered the mast. Marin scrubbed the sled rails until his hands were raw. Just before dusk, a shadow crossed the creek bend where no cloud sat. The air held the drone's faint buzz without the blink. I kept my voice low. Theo said nothing showed against the sky, so I asked him to stop looking up and listen to the ground. We slept, but not deep. The tape on the tank was our honest friend for now. If it lifts, we know. If it stays, we still watch. In the morning, we would take the serpentines and lay quiet lines in the fog, because the valley tasted our water and we needed to make it forget us. Fog climbed from the creek at dusk and erased the ridge. We had to lay lines while the valley hid because fog hides us too, and if we wait, the first clear morning belongs to them. I kept my voice low. Inez said start on the upper switchbacks before due, and I asked her to keep the core tight and count the lights that must stay. Theo folded the radio map and set the pencil on the board, and I told him to log wind and hold transmit all night. Jun carried coils and stakes, and I reminded him to save line for the creek bend. Rory checked the bow and the spare string, and I asked him to keep the first shot for dirt. Marin watched the tank. We took the goat path and turned into fog where footprints vanish at 10 paces. I touched each knot. Jun said the 2nd knot held water, so I asked him to retie low and leave slack. Rory waited by the cairn, and I told him to count to 30 between scans and never stare. The first switchback holds a shelf wide enough for 2 careful people. We wanted a trip line at shin height and a second that pulls a rattle 2 bends below. Jun set the first stake until Rock said stop. I held the coil. He said pull slow, and I kept the line from singing with cloth. Rory placed 2 flat stones where a foot might slide, and I asked him to dust them to match ground. We do not trap the hill to break legs. A fall is a shout. We build time, not trophies. The first line buys a breath. The second tells us where it came from. Halfway through the 2nd bend, the fog sat different, the way it does when space that was empty is not. I kept my voice low. Rory said wind went flat, so I told him to drop behind the rock and watch the lower cut. Jun set the coil down. A pebble clicked where the 3rd bend begins. Not a roll, a step that almost understood weight. I kept my voice low. Jun said give him 5 to finish the tie, and I asked him to leave it and hold the spear high. Rory eased the bow and touched the string. 2 shapes came up under us with hoods dark from fog. They moved with heads down and hands away from pockets. Not hollowers, people who learned quiet feet. I kept my voice low. Rory said 2 more waited lower, and I asked him to track the 2nd pair and ignore the first unless hands rose. We do not shoot first at people on stone. The lead shape slid a palm until it met a notch where footholds sit. He had climbed here before, or someone taught him. The first line lay loose across the cut, and the man's knee brushed it and gave us our breath. The rattle answered low and far. He froze. I kept my voice low. Jun said leave him to learn, and I nodded and told Rory to count slow and watch the 2nd pair. They crouched and felt for the line and found it. You cannot hide string from hands made to work. They solved a thin problem and forgot the rest. The 2nd pair reached the lower cut and paused because they heard nothing from above. They took a step and missed the dust patch Rory set, and a foot slid a hand's width and stopped on a tilted stone. Now we knew how that body would move when scared. I kept my voice low. Rory said he could put one in the dirt near their toe, and I asked him to wait for my hand. Jun shifted so the spear would not scrape. The lead pair started up again, slower now, knees high, hands on rock. We could have melted back to the saddle, but then they would count our bells and map our habits. I kept my voice low. Jun said say when, and I asked him to hold on 2 and let the hill speak on 3. I raised my hand where he could see it. 1, 2, 3. Jun pulled a thin line along the inside edge, and a wedge tapped a second wedge, and 6 fist rocks found the shelf and rolled at knee height. They did not break bones, they broke rhythm. The lead man threw his hands out and hit the wall. The second pair froze and one reached for his waist. I kept my voice low. Rory said he saw metal, so I told him dirt at the toe now. The arrow hit ground an inch from the boot and bounced with a dry clack. The hand stopped. I kept my voice low. I said, "Stop and lower your hands and back down together," and Rory watched shoulders and Jun kept the spear high. The first man breathed like a pump. He took a step down. His partner did not, and his hand found the line. I kept my voice low. I said, "Leave the rope and move one step at a time," and he paused and did not pull. They moved a step and another. The man with metal let it hang. I kept my voice low. I said, "Keep your eyes on the wall and your feet flat." They reached the lower cut. I kept my voice low. I said, "You do not want this hill," and the man with metal said, "We need water," and I told him we will not trade at night. He said, "We can pay." I said, "A night trade writes your name in the wrong book." They backed down the third bend. I kept my voice low. I said, "If you want to talk, wait on the sand by the old post at noon." And the man with metal said, "You talk like a ranger." I told him we talk like people who want to keep breathing. They left. We waited until fog took them whole. We set 2 more lines and a plank that slaps a heel without blood. Halfway to the saddle, the bell near the goat path gave a dull click. I kept my voice low. Rory said wind did not move, so I asked him to cut left and see the track from the side. Jun stepped behind the stump. A small shape crawled from scrub near the bell and sniffed where prints were thin. It made the short laugh from last week. I kept my voice low. Jun said hold for clear, and I asked him to wait for the second laugh. It came and died. We did not answer. The shape touched the line, the bell clicked, and it went. We held 10 minutes more. Work takes chaos and gives a small edge. We turned for home with lines tied and marks set. Fog thickened until lights from the valley looked like dull stars. At the last bend, the world shifted again, not from below but from above. A buzz we knew found us under the cloud, and a faint red blink breathed through cotton. I kept my voice low. Theo said the drone crossed the ridge east to west, and I asked him to kill the set and mark the tone. The drone hovered where the hill opens to the yard and then slid along the slope until it found the creek lid again. It stopped. The red blink counted as before. We lay still and let the hill play dead. A light far below flicked twice. The drone answered with a shift we learned as yes. I kept my voice low. Rory said it would try to paint our water, and I told him we would not hand it a clean edge. We did the only thing the hill allows. We placed doubt where the eye expects truth. Jun pulled the sled 3 feet so drag lines broke their curve. I set a rag on a thorn with a knot we do not use. Rory stacked 2 stones, no goat wood. The blink snapped fast 3 times. I kept my voice low. Theo said that is a mark, so I asked him to keep the board closed. The drone climbed and swung toward the switchbacks. It found the first line and hung. It did not see the second. Then the sound of a foot on stone rose from the lower cut, and a whisper from a man carried wrong in the fog, and a hand found our string by accident. The fog held its breath around us. No one shifted. Stone felt alert, waiting. Jun looked at me. I held up 1 finger. He waited. I held up 2. He set the spear to guard the inside. I held up 3. The hill moved. The slide broke their rhythm and bought minutes, not peace. We moved in pairs, kept hands on stone, and walked home through fog that hid our tracks. I kept my voice low. Rory said the lower cut was clear, so I asked him to dust the cairns and leave no fresh edges. Jun coiled line. Inside the core, we set boots by the door and kept talk short. Inez checked faces and counted us twice. Theo wrote fog heavy, slide minor, contact uncertain, and I told him to note no shots and no lights. Marin watched the tape on the tank. We ate small and listened. The drone was quiet. I kept my voice low. Inez said we needed a way to vanish without touching the ridge, and I asked her to show the old sketch. She unrolled a ranger map that named the creek, the shed, and a straight line under both. The label read, Gallery, Storage, Dry Only. We had slept over that line for months and never felt it. We tested the room by ear. 3 walls rang stone. 1 corner rang a shallow drum. Jun tapped a grid and marked where sound changed. I kept my voice low. Inez said try a thin wedge at the seam, and I asked Jun to work slow. 2 boards lifted from a hidden lip and showed tight stones and a steel ring under waxed cloth. We pulled together. The square rose and let cold air into our faces. Theo logged the time and drew a box on the map with no name. Stairs cut in rock took us down. Steps were shallow and wide, made for hands carrying boxes. The candle went first and held steady. We kept voices low. The passage bent toward the creek. The floor held a drift of grit. After 20 paces, a room opened where 4 could stand. A rusted rack clung to one wall. A plaque said, "Keep lids closed." On the far side, a low door led downhill. Hinges were clean where a cloth had wiped them. I kept my voice low. Jun said, "This is our exit if the yard burns," and I reminded him, "Exits make promises you must pay." We wrote rules before we loved it. The gallery is not a hallway. It is an option. We keep it dry, we keep it clear, and we do not teach it to strangers. I kept my voice low. Inez said cache every 20 steps, so I asked her to list light, water, cloth, chalk, and a pry. Theo drew a dotted line on the private map and wrote, "Do not run here." Rory checked footing and found 2 slick dips. He ground them flat. Marin tied a cord along the right wall so a hand could find direction in smoke. We tried sound. The candle burned clean. We tapped wood. The sound died a few feet away. We tried sound from below. 1 knock in the chamber never reached the core. 1 at the stair came back as a cough under the chair. That told us where to speak and where to stay quiet. I kept my voice low. Inez said seal the downhill door, and I asked her to pack the frame with cloth and set a wedge. Logistics came next. If we moved water through the gallery, the yard lid would not show use in daylight. We set an anchor above the stair and rigged a rope to lower jugs by hand. Slow as quiet. Theo logged the rig. Jun tied stops so a sleepy hand cannot drop a jug. We stowed shoes, 2 dust masks, and a card with 10 steps. Panic steals steps. Notes give them back. I kept my voice low. Theo said he'd teach Marin the order cold, and I asked him to test him twice a week. Before we closed, we listened. No drone, no voices. We set the square back, pressed dust into seams, and returned the chair to its scuffs so the room read the same. The surface map stayed clean. Only the log and the private sheet wore the dotted line. We slept in bands. The tape on the tank stayed flat. The bells kept their breath. At first light, we would move 2 jugs under the floor to prove the rig and then decide how often to use the gallery without teaching the valley to smell our water. Fog burned off by noon. We planned to stay quiet and let the valley forget us, but the radio woke before lunch with a voice that was not a voice. It counted. I kept my voice low. Theo said a numbers set hit at the top of the hour, and I asked him to write the first 10 and circle repeats. He filled a line. The sound was flat and clean, just digits. The count ran a minute, paused, then started again with a short header. The second set matched the first. We do not chase hope, we test it. I kept my voice low. Theo said the carrier was strong from the southeast, so I asked him to aim the loop and mark the angle. Jun spread the map. Rory watched for dust. Marin watched the pencil. On the third header, a second stream slid under the first. It whispered 5 letters, then cut. The letters could be a call sign or nothing. I kept my voice low. I said copy letters and ignore them until numbers end, and Theo nodded. When the minute closed, we looked at what we had. The first line could be time, date, or coordinates. The second could be a checksum or a trick. Inez said try them as degrees and minutes, and I reminded her to write before we move. Jun tried splits. Solve 1 put the point by the motel. Solve 2 moved it near the substation. Solve 3 put it on a service road ending at a wash. I kept my voice low. Theo said the tone trembled like a generator under load, so I asked him to write that in box the minute the tremor grew. A lazy operator would run a set from a truck in a hollow. We planned as if it was bait. They would place it where we cannot see until we are close and watch the approaches with glass or a drone. They would time the message on the hour so a listener feels clever. They would add 5 letters to spark arguments. We do not argue when a trap can learn us. I kept my voice low. Inez said assume lure and plan around it, and I asked June to trace paths that do not cross open ground. Rory drew 2. Marin drew a 3rd along the creek, and I told him leave that one for last. Theo spun for side channels. Twice we heard a faint bleed of voice under the digits, and once a cough cut in half. A real distress would not hide that hard. The set repeated at 1314. The numbers never changed. I checked the tank tape. Inez said it held, and I asked her to keep the lid and not touch the lock. We set rolls. Theo kept the radio cold except to log. Inez packed a kit. Jun took line and stakes. Rory took the bow. Marin carried a pry and a spare jug. We left at 1500 on the shaded side, moving brush. I kept my voice low. Rory said the north wash was still, so I asked him to take point to second cairn and wait. Jun hung a small bell. Inez notched a stick to read minutes. We reached a fold that looks into the substation from the side. The fence leaned and the gate hung wrong. Dust carried 1 set of prints in and none out. I kept my voice low. Rory said no glare, so I asked him to hold and watch far ridge. Theo clicked once. The set had started and strength stayed the same. If the transmitter sat here, we would hear spill. We heard clean air. The substation was a decoy. We slid to the service road by the wash and stopped at a culvert that faced southeast. The numbers came from that way. We did not climb into a pipe. I kept my voice low. Inez said odds are the source sits in the hollow past the 3rd bend, and I asked her to stay with June and mark time while Rory and I checked the first rise. We crawled to the lip and saw the motel's rear lot a 1/4 mile beyond, empty. A pole held a blank camera shell. Nothing moved, but the air felt staged. I kept my voice low. Rory said this smells like a shelf with no back wall, and I told him give me 10 minutes and then we go. When we turned to slide back, a murmur rose from the wash. Not numbers, a voice echoing off stone. It said 5 words we did not want. You're close, keep coming up. I kept my voice low. I said we heard you and we're leaving, and the murmur laughed once and cut. Rory watched the ridge for glass. I waved down to Inez. We withdrew the way we came, left the bell where it hung, and let the lure talk to itself. Back at the core, Theo read the log and pointed to letters. The 5 letters, taken as initials, matched words on a quarry sign we passed last week. I kept my voice low. Theo said the letters spell the warning on that sign, and I asked him to box it and write 1 word under it. Bait. We would not take that path again. The numbers can count without us. Tomorrow we move water under the floor and keep the surface still because the valley asked us to write our names, and we do not sign in ink we cannot wash away. The numbers stopped at dusk and the ridge fell back to wind and grit. We kept lights dead and hands busy. I kept my voice low. Inez said we sleep in bands and move water under the floor at first light, and I asked her to keep the kit by the hatch and check the wedges. Theo drew battery squares and logged the hour. Jun laid the line bag by the door. Rory checked the bow. Marin watched the yard and tried not to blink. Near midnight, a thin buzz crossed the hill. The drone came through fog like a moth you only hear. Theo lifted 2 fingers. I kept my voice low. He said it drifted over the tank and toward the saddle, and I told him to close the log and keep still. The blink hovered, counted, and slid away. It was learning. We had planned the slide for a day when wind moved west so sound would wash toward the quarry. The seam sits above the second switchback. 3 wedges bite, a safety pin holds, 1 strike turns weight into motion if you do it right. We checked it weekly. At dawn, the wind still went west. We made the call. I kept my voice low. Inez said, "Take the narrow route and hold until I say clear," and I asked her to keep the gallery square open and the rope ready. Theo stayed with the loop down and the set cold. Jun carried the hammer wrapped in cloth. Rory took the bow and a coil. Marin carried the pry. We moved behind the crest and cut into pale rock. Fog ran in sheets. I set my palm on the seam and felt it ready. I kept my voice low. Jun said the first wedge sat deep, so I asked him to stuff cloth under the head so metal would not ring. Rory eased to the vantage. Marin stayed with me. Routine saves you. We tied into a horn, kept slack clean, and stayed out from under the drop. I pressed on the seam. It clicked like old wood. We waited for fog to cover the bend. I raised a finger. Jun touched the wedge twice and listened. The hill said go. Then a voice rose where no voice belonged. Marin answered from the second bend. He said he had gone down to check the rattle because he heard a fox, and I told him not to move and to keep both hands on the wall. Rory looked at me the way people do when they already know the price. If the seam walked now, it would take the shelf and anything on it. If we waited, the fog could thin, the drone could return, a truck could reach the cut. I kept my voice low. Inez said bring him up and make the hill wait, and I told her we would try and pay what it costs. I lay flat and dragged the rope until I felt his weight. Rory tied his coil to my belt and kept clear of the pin. Jun took the line behind my shoulder so it would not saw skin. "On 3, I said. "Step to the next notch and don't look up." He said he heard me. I counted 1, 2, 3. He rose a handspan. Stone hissed under his heel. The seam shifted under my chest. I kept my voice low. I told Jun to pull smooth, and he did. Rory leaned and held. Marin reached the shelf and clung to it. The seam decided to walk anyway. We had to make it clean or it would tear wrong. I told Rory to cut the coil from the pin and give me slack. He did it quick. Jun set the hammer, waited for a nod, and gave the pin one dull strike. The sound went into the hill and did not echo. The seam gave up. We ran along the contour, not down. Down is where stone goes. The shoulder broke in steps. Blocks slid and rolled. Dust blew past like a hot breath. The rattle snapped and went quiet. Far below, a horn wailed and stuck. When it stopped, the second switchback was gone. In its place was a slope raw and new. We waited for small moves to finish. A thin plate on the left shed pebbles. We marked it and pulled back to the yard. I kept my voice low. Inez said the tape on the tank lay flat, and I asked her to keep it fresh and note no change. Theo wrote the time. Jun checked Marin's knee and said it would hold. Rory watched the ridge for glass. The valley started its day under a new rule. 2 trucks reached the base of the fresh slope. Men got out, and a cable paid out like a dead snake. The drone came and went. We set to water. The slide's noise bought us hours. We would move jugs through the gallery and leave the lid untouched. The gallery opened clean. We kept the candle small and the rope through the anchor. One lowered, one walked below, one logged. We moved 8 jugs and closed the square. Theo marked each with a time. I kept my voice low. He said wind turned south, so I asked him to fold the mast and keep his head down. Mid-run, the radio woke with a human throat, not numbers. It said a name that was not ours, then asked who held the hill. The tone was fed and rested. I told Theo to pull the plug and write every word. He did. From the tower, we saw trucks fail and leave cable. Toward dusk, the numbers returned with 4 new digits for a time and a channel we keep cold. Bait wears out if you ignore it. I told Theo to box it and write BAIT again. We set an early watch. I lay with rope burns and tried to sleep. Just before midnight, the bell on the goat path breathed, then clicked once, 2 fingernails on string. I kept my voice low. Inez said west was quiet, and I asked her to hold the hatch and wait for my mark. Jun took the spear. Rory set the bow. Marin held the latch with both hands. We let the minute pass. Theo wrote the time with his finger on his knee so the log would be clean when light came. We did not answer the click. Morning was cold and calm. The trucks were gone. The drone did not return. We counted what the slide had bought: a blocked road, a tired enemy, and a hill that punishes lazy feet. We also counted what it almost cost. Marin limped but walked. Our wedges sat spent. Jun's shoulder shook once when he thought no one saw. We used the quiet for the boring jobs that keep a place. We replaced the rattle with a plank that slaps a heel without a bang. I kept my voice low. Inez said boil on schedule and keep jugs locked, and I asked her to set 2 aside for pasteurize only to save fuel. Theo watched the jar barometer and said weather would break by night. We brought in cord and covered the rails. At 1500, the radio counted for a minute. When the set closed, a thin voice said parley and named a time near dark by the old post. We did not go. A parley after a slide reads like a head count in disguise. We watched the ridge at the hour they named. Nobody came to the post. Down in the hollow, a truck idled without lights, then killed the engine. Hills prefer truth. After sunset, the fog returned. We reset lines and checked the plank. I kept my voice low. Jun said the knots held, and I asked him to leave slack so the string would not sing. Rory set the cairn. Marin set a small can with grit where the bell used to live so we could hear weight before it rang. Back in the core, we split night into 2-hour blocks. I closed my eyes and woke to the bell breathing again, softer. Theo raised 2 fingers. Drone. The blink searched the yard, moved toward the creek lid, paused, then drifted to the fresh slide. It hovered long enough to learn that time would not fix it, then turned and went. At dawn, frost silvered rope and rails. We stepped careful. I kept my voice low. Inez said this is what we keep now. Time, water, and a hill that makes strangers tired, and I told her we keep each other first. I made a line in the log for us alone. A hill is not a wall. It is a choice you remake when the wind moves. We chose to hold. We chose to save a boy who made a mistake. We chose to spend a plan to buy minutes we can fill with work and breath. We stood under the tower and watched the quiet valley. No trucks moved, no numbers called. The creek made its small sound and the tape on the tank lay flat. For a few hours, that was enough. Then we went back to sweeping because a clean floor does not betray you when you run. We kept the plan tight. Dawn put frost on the ropes. We kept talk short and hands busy. I kept my voice low. Inez said check the batteries before the sun clears the saddle, and I asked Theo to read the meter twice and write both numbers. Jun tightened the rails. Rory checked the cairns. Marin swept the plank. The meter wasn't kind. Charge sat under the mark we call careful. Wind might come by noon and the small panel would crawl, but morning only gave what we'd saved. I kept my voice low. Theo said we could make the day if we killed everything but pasteurize and log, and I told him to tape the toggles and box the plan. We took 3 swallows each of safe water. We drank to keep hands steady. Inez crossed out an extra line she had wanted if the sun felt generous. The sun didn't. We stared at the new slope. The cut was gone. We watched for creep and saw none. I kept my voice low. Rory said he would chalk the thin plate by dusk, and I asked him to set 2 pebbles to catch a liar move. Jun said he'd rebuild the rattle 2 bends up. Marin asked to carry rocks and stood tall when no one argued. By noon, the valley sent 3 men with spades to look angry at the hill. They slipped twice and argued with the cable. We wrote the time and they stared at the broken drone. I kept my voice low. Theo said the numbers channel stayed dead, so I asked him to keep it that way and watch the blank. He wrote, "No signal is a signal." We moved 2 jugs through the gallery and shut it. Slow keeps secrets. The square fit without noise. Inez said pasteurize 1 pot and save the rest for night, and I asked her to write the minute she killed the flame. Theo underlined safe once. As the light tilted, we took stock. Food, tight but fair. Water, safe if we behave. Power, low but holding. I kept my voice low. Inez said write a line for tonight so the room knows how to think, and I wrote, work is calm, noise is debt, mercy is for the people under this roof first. At first star, the radio coughed and went still. We didn't plug it in. Theo said no change in the valley, and I told him to make tea with water we'd already counted as fire, then write the time we sat. Inez read the list for tomorrow. Check the thin plate for creep, sweep terrace edges, change cloth on strings, hide the straight line by the tank with dust. Teach Marin the gallery order until the words live in his hands. She looked at me. I kept my voice low. I said we hold because we can, and we leave when the hill says go, not when fear says run. Night came clean and cold. The bell breathed and didn't click. We kept the hatch closed and the room dim. I wrote mistakes in the back of the log and put my name by 2. Before sleep, I walked the yard. The tape on the tank lay flat. The brush hid the lid. From the tower, the new slope looked like a black sea that had decided not to move again. That decision is never final, but it was ours for now. Back in the core, we lay in a row like tools on a bench, simple and used. I kept my voice low. Inez said wake her if the bell speaks, and I told her I would. Theo set the pencil in the notch he carved so it wouldn't rattle. Jun rolled his shoulder and slept. Rory hummed 3 notes. Marin whispered the gallery steps and smiled at 10. Holding the hill means boring work that keeps crisis small. Rules that feel fussy until the day they save you, choices you make in fog and live with in daylight. It means building time, spending it carefully, counting water like luck you earned. It means saying no to the easy voice in the canyon and yes to the person next to you who needs a hand onto the shelf. It means rope burns you call a fair price. We are not heroes on a mountain. We are 6 people who cleaned the floor, boiled the pot, watched the ridge, and told the truth on paper. If the valley forgets us, that is good work. If it remembers, we have a plan. If the plan breaks, we will write a new one, test it until it holds, and keep breathing between the tests. That is the job tonight. The ridge stays quiet and Frost holds in the shade until the sun finds it. We sweep the paths, check the strings, and read the tape on the tank. It lies flat. I keep my voice low. Inez says boil on the hour, and I ask Theo to mark the battery line and keep the set dark. Jun oils the hinge. Rory chalks the thin plate. Marin recites the gallery steps without looking down. By noon, the valley does not move. The drone stays gone. A truck shifts in the motel lot and settles. We let the hill be boring because boring keeps you alive. For now, that is enough. Just after 3, a breath slips through the radio, then a tone, then a word that might be a name or wind on a wire. I keep my voice low. Theo says strength is low and sliding, and I tell him to write it and keep the plug out. The voice repeats, fades, and returns with 5 letters and a time near dusk. We do not climb for a stage cue. We set the board tonight rules and close 2 doors. We watch the ridge and the creek lid. The hour arrives and passes. No one climbs. No lights blink. The voice thins to static and holds. Inez pours tea from water counted as fire. We drink slow and name the parts that worked. The slide held. The gallery hit us. The tank stayed ours. I keep my voice low. Theo says log the sign off, and I nod and tell him to write we are alive and holding. If someone hears this later, double check your doors, count your water, and keep one plan that buys you time. If a voice calls through the canyon and says your name, do not follow it into fog. If numbers promise a clean route, write them down and wait for morning. We will do the same. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. See you in the next one.